In December 1241, the Mongol army stood at the gates of Vienna, having just decimated combined Polish and German forces at Legnica. They had obliterated Hungary at Mohi, slaughtering tens of thousands of European knights in one day. No military power was left capable of halting their advance. The roads to Paris, London, and Rome were now open. And then, just as unexpectedly, they turned back. The Mongols abandoned Europe and would never return. The reason? A man who drank himself to death nearly 10,000 kilometers away. His name was Ögedei Khan, the third son of Genghis Khan, a man many historians credit with unwittingly saving Europe from the same fate as Russia, Persia, or China. But today, the question we aim to explore is not merely what happened, but whether the death of a drunkard truly changed the course of history, or whether Europe would have managed on its own. Before we dive into the story, feel free to drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and the time for you. I'm genuinely curious to see how far the time zones reach. Let's rewind to 1186, the year a child was born in a Mongolian chieftain's tent. This was a child no one imagined would eventually rule the largest land empire the world had ever seen. Ögedei, born around 1186, started his life with two major disadvantages. He was a third son and lacked the warrior skills of his father and brothers. In steppe culture, birth order was everything. The eldest son, Yoshi, was a natural heir. Chagatai, the second son, was a fierce and ambitious warrior. Ögedei, by contrast, was described by contemporary sources as jovial, easygoing, and fond of parties. From a young age, Ögedei developed a problematic relationship with alcohol, not the kind we think of today, but arag, a fermented mare's milk, the traditional Mongol drink. While most people would drink it only during festivals, Ögedei drank constantly. Yet, there was something Genghis Khan saw in him early on. He understood that Ögedei wasn't a genius. That might sound like a flaw, but in the context of Mongol politics, filled with egos and ambition, it was actually a rare strength. The decisive battle came in 1220, during the Mongol campaign against the Khwarezmian Empire. Ögedei's older brothers, Yoshi and Chagatai, were at odds over tactics during the siege of Gurenge, also known as Urgench. Yoshi wished to preserve the city intact because it was part of his designated territory, while Chagatai wanted to destroy it as a warning to others. Genghis Khan made the decision to appoint Ögedei, the third son, as sole commander. Ögedei didn't try to prove he was smarter than his brothers. Instead, he consulted seasoned generals, listened to their advice, and made the call: cut off the water supply and wait. Gurenge fell in 1221, not because of brilliant tactics, but through strategic coordination and delegating to the right people. This first lesson from Ögedei teaches us something crucial. Sometimes knowing what you don't know is far more important than pretending to know everything. In 1219, before launching an invasion of Khwarezm, Genghis Khan convened a Krai, a meeting of Mongol chiefs to decide his successor. Yoshi, as the eldest, was a natural choice. But there was a problem. Yoshi's parentage was in question. His mother, Borte, had been kidnapped by the Merkit tribe and wasn't rescued until several months later. When she gave birth to Yoshi, rumors began to swirl. Chagatai, the second son, openly opposed Yoshi. The two brothers nearly came to blows at the Krai. In a display of wisdom, Genghis Khan asked both of them, "If not you two, then who?" Both replied, "Ögedei." Why? Because Ögedei was the only one both factions could accept. He didn't threaten anyone's position. He lacked the ambition to cause concern, and most importantly, he could listen. Genghis Khan nodded and agreed, but he gave Ögedei a stern warning: quit drinking. Ögedei promised to try, but this was a promise he would break every day for the rest of his life. In August 1227, Genghis Khan died at the age of 72 during a campaign against the Western Shia. The empire he left behind stretched from Korea to Persia. But Ögedei didn't immediately take the throne. In Mongol tradition, the youngest brother, Tauri, served as regent for 2 years to prepare for the official Kurultai. These 2 years were filled with intrigue, power struggles, and political maneuvering. Finally, on September 13th, 1229, on the banks of the Kurland River, Ögedei was officially proclaimed Great Khan. But there's an interesting detail. According to tradition, the chosen one must refuse 3 times before accepting the position to demonstrate humility. Ögedei did so, and some say he wasn't simply pretending. He genuinely hesitated. Why? Because he understood the gravity of the responsibility and knew his own weaknesses. Even though Chagatai supported Ögedei's ascension, he remained deeply concerned about Ögedei's drinking. So he appointed an official named Chinkai to oversee Ögedei's behavior. His job was to ensure that Ögedei didn't drink excessively. Ögedei, ever the clever one, agreed to limit the number of cups he drank each day. But then he instructed goldsmiths to make the cups twice the size. Technically, he kept his promise, but each cup now contained twice as much alcohol. When Chinkai objected, Ögedei laughed and said, "I promise to limit the number of cups, not the amount of alcohol." This is not merely a tale of addiction. It's the story of a man struggling with personal demons while shouldering the responsibility of ruling much of the known world. Contemporary historical accounts, particularly by the Persian historian Rashid Allen, describe massive, immovable vat of alcohol at Ögedei's court, where cupbearers were constantly pouring drinks during feasts. But what's crucial here is understanding that, in Mongol culture, drinking wasn't simply a personal vice. It was part of the political ritual. Important decisions were often made during these feasts, and unity was cemented through shared drinking.
Railroad infrastructure presents a deeper friction.
He drank
The Transcontinental
to maintain the loyalty
Railroad,
of
completed in
Mongol lords.
1869,
This was
connected
his
the coast
justification.
through terrain that
In
official records
1235,
describe as sparsely populated.
Ögedei ordered the
The
creation
construction
of something the
photographs show
Mongols had
something
never
unusual,
had,
not
a
just the
permanent
laying of
capital.
track, but the
Kakram
simultaneous
rose
appearance
in
of
the Orkhon
stations, water
Valley,
towers,
about
switching yards,
400
and maintenance
kilometers from
facilities,
modern-day
all built to
Ulaanbaatar.
specifications that seemed
The city
disproportionate
wasn't
to the
large,
populations they
only
served.
about 10,000
Ogden,
people,
Utah,
but it was
photographed in
incredibly
1870,
diverse.
shows a rail
It
depot
boasted a
designed to
Muslim
handle
quarter
freight
with
volumes
markets,
typical of
a
cities 5
Chinese
times its
quarter with
size.
artisans,
The switching
temples,
infrastructure
mosques,
could
and
accommodate
Christian
dozens of
churches.
simultaneous
At the
trains.
heart of Ögedei's
The warehousing
palace was a
capacity
technical
suggested
wonder.
commercial
A
activity that
giant
wouldn't
silver
materialize
wine
for another
fountain
2
crafted by
decades.
French
The
goldsmith
official
Gunn
explanation
Boucher.
is forward
The
planning.
fountain,
Railroads
over
were
2 meters
speculative.
tall, was
Investors
shaped
built
like a tree
capacity in
with gilded
anticipation of
spouts
growth.
carved as serpents
Infrastructure
and lions.
attracts development.
Each spout
But
dispensed a different
photographs from
drink.
smaller rail towns
Aragine, honey
complicate this
wine, and
narrative.
rice wine.
Cheyenne,
At
Wyoming.
the top was a silver
Population
angel.
in
When the
1870,
Khan desired
approximately
a servant would
1,500.
blow into a tube,
The Union Pacific
causing
Depot,
the angel to
photographed
blow a
that same
trumpet,
year, featured
signaling
passenger
the drink
facilities for
pourers to
thousands.
begin.
Freight
This
handling
wasn't
systems
merely
built to
indulgence.
industrial scale,
It was a
and
display
architectural
of
detailing,
power.
carved
A
stone,
Mongol
imported
empire
fixtures,
strong enough to
ornamental
summon
ironwork
craftsmen from
that
Paris.
seems inconsistent with a
Wealthy
frontier
enough to
outpost.
build silver
The
fountains,
surrounding town
and
in the
confident enough
photograph,
to publicly flaunt the
mostly empty
Khan's love
lots.
of alcohol.
The same pattern
While
appears
Ögedei
across the
drank
rail
in his
corridor.
capital,
Reno,
his armies
Laramie,
were spilling
North
blood
Platte.
across Asia.
Stations
When
photographed in
Ögedei took the
isolation,
throne in
designed for
1229,
throughput that wouldn't exist
China
for
was
years.
divided.
In Britain, the
The
railway
Jin
expansion
dynasty
of the
controlled the north,
1840s and
and the Song
1850s
dynasty
created a
ruled the
similar
south.
architectural footprint.
Genghis Khan
The
had
stations
battled
weren't
the
just
Jin for
functional.
nearly 20
They were
years,
monumental.
but never finished
St.
them all.
Pancras in London, completed
Ögedei
in
was determined to
1868,
complete his
featured a
father's
wrought
work.
iron train shed
In
spanning
1230,
240 feet,
He
the
carefully
largest
prepared his
single-span
troops.
structure in the world
He
at the
gathered
time.
his generals,
The attached hotel was
including
designed with over
Subutai,
300 rooms,
widely
hydraulic
considered the
lifts,
Mongol
and
Empire's
Gothic
greatest
revival
military
facades that
strategist,
rivaled
and
cathedrals.
meticulously
The
devised
photographs
his
from its
plan.
construction show the
problem with
station
the
rising
Jin
in an
wasn't their
area described in
weakness.
contemporary
They had
accounts as
strong
partially
fortifications,
developed.
multiple
Yet the
armies,
engineering
and the
required,
Great Wall
the
for
ironwork,
protection.
the
Their
foundation
fatal
systems,
flaw
the
was their
integration of
emperor,
gas lighting and
Yuan
ventilation,
Shishu, who
suggests
was both
knowledge refined
incompetent
over
and
generations, not developed experimentally.
Simple, but
Liverpool's Lime Street Station,
and
photographed in the 1850s,
instead of attacking
shows a
cities
similar
head-on.
scale mismatch.
The Mongols
the train
cut
shed,
supply
rebuilt in
lines,
1867, could accommodate multiple full-length trains simultaneously,
human shields
but the surrounding neighborhood, visible in period photographs, appears inconsistent with the density required to justify such capacity. The explanation given: Liverpool was a major
Mongols
port.
drove
Rail infrastructure connected inland manufacturing to shipping. The investment reflected projected growth, but the photographs don't show gradual expansion.
This was
They show
psychological
completion
warfare
before demand.
at its cruelest.
Urban water and sewer systems present the same timing friction. London's sewer network, designed by Joseph Bazalgette and constructed between 1859 and 1875, is described as a response to the Great Stink of 1858. The system included over 1,100 miles of street sewers feeding into 82 miles of main intercepting sewers.
Including massive
the engineering was
trebuchets
extraordinary. Gravity-fed systems requiring precise elevation calculations, brick tunnels large enough to walk through, pumping stations that resembled cathedrals. The photographs of the construction show excavations cutting through London at a scale that seems impossible for the period. The official timeline states the work took 16 years, but the photographic record shows simultaneous construction across multiple districts. Tunneling, bricklaying, pump station assembly,
over
all happening at
900,000 people
once. The
died
labor
in Kiang,
required would have been immense.
most from starvation,
Yet contemporary accounts
disease
describe
rather
minimal
than
disruption
combat.
to daily
In
life.
1233,
Chicago's water intake
with no
system,
hope left,
built in the
Emperor
1860s,
I
extended a
fled the
tunnel
city.
2 miles into
On
Lake
February
Michigan.
1234,
The tunnel was dug using
Kiang
techniques that
surrendered.
wouldn't become standard
Upon
until
hearing the
decades
news,
later. The
Ögedei
intake
to a
crib,
3-day
photographed in
feast in
1867, was a massive
Drinking until
stone
he
structure
passed
built
out
in open
and
water,
taking a week to
designed to
regain
supply a city of
consciousness.
over 1 million people.
However,
Chicago's
the victory
population at
wasn't
the
final.
time?
The
Roughly
Gene Emperor fled
300,000.
south and
The
made a last
explanation:
stand at
Chicago
Kaiju.
was growing
Here,
rapidly.
An
The Great
unexpected
Fire would prove
alliance
the need
formed
for
between
robust
the Mongols
infrastructure.
and the Song
Engineers
dynasty.
built for the future.
The Song had been
But the
enemies of the
photographic
Gene for
evidence
over a
suggests
century.
the infrastructure
But when the
preceded the
Mongols
growth
proposed
curve.
an alliance
Across
to
the
eliminate
United
the
States,
Gene,
grain
they
elevators
agreed.
appeared in the
This
1870s and
proved to be a
1880s
massive
with a
strategic
uniformity
error.
that feels
In
coordinated.
February 1234,
Buffalo, New
Mongol
York
Song
became the
forces
grain
besieged
elevator
Kao.
capital of the
The
world.
last Gene
The
Emperor,
structures,
Wan
photographed
Shishu,
extensively
committed
in the
suicide.
1880s, were
The
massive,
Gene dynasty,
some over 100
which had
feet tall,
ruled northern
capable of
China
storing
for
millions
more
of
than 100
bushels.
years,
They utilized
was
conveyor
no more.
systems,
But the
automated
Song
sorting,
didn't
and
realize
storage
the
techniques
danger.
that official
They had
histories
just
attribute
removed
to
the only
incremental
barrier
innovation.
between them
But the
and the
photographs show
Mongols,
these structures
who
appearing
now
nearly
turned their
simultaneously
attention
across
south.
the Great Lakes
In
region and the rail
1235,
corridors of the
Ögedei
Midwest.
outlined an
Duluth,
ambitious
Milwaukee,
plan to expand
Toledo,
the
Chicago,
empire westward,
all featured grain
all the way to
elevators
the
of
Great
similar
Sea,
design, similar
the Atlantic
capacity,
Ocean.
similar
He
engineering
entrusted
solutions,
this task
built
to his
within the
nephew
same
Ögedei
narrow
Khan,
time frame.
the son
The
of the late
architectural
Yoshi,
consistency
and the
suggests a
seasoned General
template.
Subutai,
The scale
who,
suggests preparation
though
for
60 years
agricultural
old,
output that
was
wouldn't
still
fully
the sharpest
materialize
mind in
until
the
mechanized
Mongol
farming
military.
became widespread
Their
in the
force,
1900s.
numbering around
Minneapolis,
150,000
photographed in
Mongol
1885,
warriors with tens of
shows
thousands
grain
of auxiliary
elevators
troops,
lining the Mississippi
would push
River.
westward,
The city's population was
targeting
under
everything in their
130,000.
At
The
this
storage
time,
capacity visible in the
13th century
photographs,
Russia wasn't a
sufficient for
unified
the
country,
agricultural
but
output
a
of an area
fragmented
10 times
patchwork
that
of
size.
warring
The
principalities.
administrative systems show
Kiev,
similar compression.
Novgorod,
The period between
Vladimir,
1870
and
and
Moscow
1900
each had its
saw
own
the
prince,
establishment of
and they
standardized
loathed each
municipal
other as much as they hated
record-keeping,
invaders.
fire departments with
This
professional
division
hierarchies,
played perfectly
police
into
forces
the
with
Mongol
district
strategy
divisions,
of divide
and public
and
health
conquer.
systems with
In
inspection
December
protocols.
1237,
These weren't gradual
Mongol
developments.
forces entered Ryazan,
They appeared in many
a
cities
small
within a
city
span
near
of
the
5 to
border.
10 years.
Ögedei Khan
Fire
sent
departments
messengers
in
demanding
particular
their
show
surrender.
architectural consistency.
Give us one
Fire
tenth
stations
of your wealth,
photographed in
horses,
Boston,
and people,
Philadelphia,
and you will
Baltimore,
live.
and Washington
The
between
Prince of
1875
Ryazan
and
refused
1890 share
and sent
design
messengers
elements.
to other
Similar bay door
principalities for help.
proportions, similar
No
tower
one
structures,
came.
similar
On
interior
December
layouts.
21st,
The equipment, steam
1237,
pumpers, hose carts,
Ryazan
ladder
was
wagons,
besieged.
shows
5
standardized
days later,
manufacturing that
city
suggests
fell.
centralized production,
Everyone,
not
men,
regional
women, and
variation.
children,
The
was
official
killed,
narrative
and the
describes
city
this
was
as
reduced to
technological
ashes.
diffusion.
Russian
Fire insurance
chronicles
companies
reported
promoted
that
best practices.
not a single eye was
Municipal
left to weep for
governments
the
shared
dead.
innovations.
This was part of
Standardization
Mongol
emerged
psychological
from
warfare.
practical necessity.
If you
But the
surrender,
photographic
you
record
live.
shows
If
simultaneity
you resist,
where the explanations
everyone
describe
dies.
sequence.
The news
Returning
of
to the
Ryazan's
photographs
fall
themselves,
spread rapidly.
the structures stand
By
isolated
February
not because they were
1238,
abandoned, but because
Mongol
they were
forces
premature.
reached Vladimir,
The term
the
Tartaria
capital of the
has become
Vladimir
a framework for this
Principality,
observation.
the wealthiest and most powerful region in Russia. Grand Prince Yuri, too, gathered his forces, but it was too late. Subutai split his army into multiple columns, attacking several cities simultaneously, ensuring the enemy couldn't concentrate its forces. On February 7th, Vladimir was besieged. 7 days later, the city fell. The royal family took refuge in the main cathedral, but Mongol forces sealed the doors and set the building ablaze.
Not a claim about who built these structures, but a label for the timing mismatch itself. The word carries implications. Inherited infrastructure, pre-existing systems, development that followed rather than preceded. Whether this reflects coordinated planning, economic speculation, or something the official narratives haven't fully articulated, the photographic evidence invites examination.
However,
because the images don't show ruins, they show preparation.
The Mongols had
and preparation implies knowledge of what was coming.
With each
the word Tartaria appears on European maps from the 16th through 19th centuries.
Enemy positions
it referred to the vast interior regions of Asia,
as the
areas beyond Ottoman and Russian control, inhabited by Turkic and Mongolic peoples. The term was geographic shorthand,
the
not a
battle
unified
ended in a
empire.
matter of hours.
By the 1800s, as these regions were absorbed into the Russian Empire and better mapped, the label faded from cartographic use. Its modern reinterpretation is recent. Online communities began using Tartaria in the 2010s as a label for architectural and infrastructural patterns that seem inconsistent with official development timelines. The term became shorthand for a specific observation, structures that appear to precede the cities around them. This reinterpretation is not historical consensus. It is interpretive framework, a way of organizing architectural evidence that creates friction with accepted narratives. Three models attempt to explain what the photographs show. The first model is conventional, forward planning and speculative investment. Governments and investors built infrastructure in anticipation of growth. Railroads extended into undeveloped territory to stimulate settlement. Civic buildings were designed to accommodate projected populations. Engineers overbuilt systems to avoid future obsolescence. The photographs capture moments of construction before surrounding development filled in. This explanation accounts for much of the evidence. Economic booms drive infrastructure investment. The Gilded Age saw unprecedented capital accumulation. Architects used shared stylistic vocabularies because they trained in the same institutions and read the same pattern books. The timing compression, multiple cities building similar structures simultaneously, reflects industrialization. Mass-produced materials, standardized engineering techniques, and improved transportation allowed construction at scales previously impossible. Under this model, the photographs show exactly what they appear to show. Buildings under construction in developing areas, captured before urban density obscured their isolation. The second model suggests inherited infrastructure, not from Tartaria as a civilization, but from pre-existing development that official timelines compress or misattribute. This interpretation points to the 1810s as a period of discontinuity. The eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815 caused the year without a summer in 1816. Crop failures, climate disruption, and economic collapse followed. Population records from this period show gaps. Census data becomes inconsistent. Administrative continuity breaks. The question this model raises, what existed before 1816 that the recovery period rebuilt or reoccupied? The architectural consistency, the overscaled infrastructure, the photographic isolation. These could reflect not new construction in empty territory, but reconstruction of systems that had existed previously, built for populations that had declined or relocated. Under this model, the photographs capture not anticipatory building, but restoration. The structures stand isolated because the surrounding development that once justified them had not yet recovered. This interpretation remains speculative. It requires evidence of pre-1815 population density significantly higher than official records indicate. It requires architectural continuity across a demographic collapse that disrupted record keeping. It requires infrastructural inheritance without clear documentary chains. But it accounts for the scale mismatch in ways forward planning struggles to explain. The third model is administrative, centralized infrastructure planning that official histories fragment into regional narratives.
He sent letters
Municipal governments, railroad companies, and federal agencies may have coordinated development far more systematically than decentralized accounts suggest. The architectural consistency, the simultaneous construction, the standardized engineering, all could reflect top-down planning obscured by narratives emphasizing local initiative and regional competition. Under this model, the photographs show state-directed infrastructure built according to templates, deployed across regions according to schedules, designed for populations calculated through demographic projections. The isolation in the images reflects not premature construction, but staged deployment.
On April 9,
Infrastructure placed first, populations directed afterward. This explanation accounts for the administrative uniformity, the timing compression, and the scale preparation. It doesn't require lost civilizations or demographic collapse. It requires only that the degree of centralized planning was greater than official narratives acknowledge. All three models remain interpretations. None can be definitively proven from the photographic record alone. What the photographs do show is structural timing that creates unease. Buildings that appear complete before their context arrive. Infrastructure scaled for demand that hasn't yet materialized. Systems that function as if the populations they serve already exist. The label Tartaria has become a way to name this unease, not as historical fact, but as metaphor for infrastructural prematurity. The term allows people to discuss the timing friction without requiring allegiance to any single explanation. The evidence itself, the photographs, the architectural records, the census data, the infrastructural capacity, invites examination regardless of interpretive framework. Returning to 1872, San Francisco City Hall standing in isolation, designed for a city 3 times its size, photographed before the neighborhoods around it filled in. Whether this reflects ambitious planning, inherited infrastructure, or centralized deployment, the image itself remains.
The first volley
the
was
structure
aimed at the
exists.
horses,
The surrounding
not the knights.
emptiness exists.
A horse hit
The timing
by an arrow
friction
would
exists.
panic,
The photographs
disrupting
don't resolve the
formation.
question.
The
They
second
preserve
volley
it.
targeted weak
And perhaps
points,
that's the function they
joints,
serve,
underarms,
not
and
as
necks.
proof of any particular
The third volley
narrative,
was
but
high
as
arc
records
fire.
of a pattern that
So
official
arrows
histories
fell from
haven't fully
above,
addressed.
bypassing
Structures that
shields.
seem to anticipate
Polish
their own
knights,
necessity.
encumbered by 30
Infrastructure
to
that
40
arrives before the
kilograms of
demand that
armor,
would justify it.
fell to the ground,
The images remain in
unable to
archives,
rise.
silent,
They became
unresolved,
easy targets
waiting
for
for
the Mongol
explanations that
cavalry
account
in
for what
close
they show.
combat. But there was more. During the battle, the Mongols deployed something that created thick, white smoke with a foul smell, covering the battlefield. Many historians believe this was a primitive chemical weapon, possibly smoke bombs made from sulfur and horse dung. The smoke disoriented the Polish forces, making it hard to see the enemy. The choking air caused panic, and the once organized ranks lost cohesion. The final blow came when Polish infantry tried to advance in support, only to hear shouts in Polish. Run, run, all is lost. This was psychological warfare. Mongol forces had Slavic prisoners who knew the language and used their knowledge to create fear and confusion. The infantry, thinking the main force had been defeated, began to flee. The formation completely broke down. Duke Henry, realizing all was lost, tried to escape but was captured and beheaded on the battlefield. After the battle, the Mongols collected horrifying trophies. They cut off the right ear of every dead soldier to count their kills. According to records, they collected 9 sacks full of human ears. Henry's head was mounted on a spear and paraded through Polish cities as a warning. Legnica lost around 8,000 men, most killed, while the Mongols suffered about 500 to 1,000 casualties. But this was only the first battle. 2 days later, 800 kilometers away, an even greater disaster awaited. The Battle of Mohi on April 11, 1241, marked Hungary's darkest day. King Bela IV of Hungary was one of the few European monarchs who understood the threat posed by the Mongols. Since 1229, he had received warnings from fleeing Rus. In 1237, a Dominican friar named Julianis brought a letter from Ögedei Khan demanding Hungary's surrender. Bela didn't respond, which was a grave mistake. However, Bela wasn't idle. He began preparing, summoning the Hungarian nobility, gathering around 15,000 to 20,000 knights, and accepting 40,000 Cumans, steppe people fleeing the Mongols, as allies. He fortified defenses along the Danube, assembling a total force of around 60,000 to 70,000 men, the largest army ever assembled in Europe in the 13th century. But there was a major issue: internal discord. The Hungarian nobility despised the Cumans, viewing them as barbarians. When rumors spread that the Cumans were spying for the Mongols, a group of nobles attacked and killed their leader, Khan Kutan. Furious, The Cumans abandoned Hungary overnight, and 40,000 warriors disappeared. This was exactly what Subutai had hoped for. He had deliberately spread rumors to create division among the Hungarians. On the night before the battle, April 10, 1241, Hungarian forces camped on the banks of the Sejo River near the village of Mohi. Bela arranged his defenses carefully, establishing his headquarters behind the river, with the only bridge heavily guarded. He placed thousands of tents in tight formation, creating a cloth fortress, and positioned outposts at the far end of the bridge. Bela thought the Mongols would have to cross the bridge to attack, and believed this choke point would be easy to defend. He didn't know that Subutai didn't follow European conventions. At 2 a.m. on April 11th, Mongol forces split into two groups. Group 1, led by Ögedei Khan, launched a frontal assault on the bridge, making the Hungarians believe this was the main attack. Group 2, led by Subutai, silently crossed the river 3 kilometers south, planning to attack from behind. Mongol forces began attacking the bridge, and Hungarian outposts resisted fiercely, mocking the Mongols for attacking the most fortified position. They didn't realize that this was just a diversion. While the Hungarian forces concentrated at the bridge, Subutai's troops had crossed the river and were now advancing on the Hungarians from the south. Suddenly, arrows rained down from behind, catching the Hungarians by surprise. Many soldiers were still in their tents, unarmed and unprepared. At the same time, Ögedei Khan intensified the attack on the bridge. The Hungarian outposts were overwhelmed from both sides, and the Mongol forces surrounded the Hungarian camp from 3 directions, north, east, and south. They left only one route open, west, toward the forest. This was an oversight. It was classic Mongol tactics. They always left an escape route, so the enemy would flee rather than fight to the death. When Hungarian forces saw the open route, they began to run. There was no organization, no formation, just frantic flight. And that's when the Mongols activated their true plan. The Mongol cavalry pursued, but not to kill immediately. They hunted like predators. They shot arrows at the slowest runners, isolating small groups from the main crowd, creating continuous panic. In the forest, the Hungarian forces couldn't regroup. They just ran until they were exhausted and killed. The pursuit lasted nearly 60 kilometers. The aftermath was devastating for Hungary. Around 10,000 died on the battlefield, while another 30,000 to 40,000 died during the pursuit. The total death toll exceeded 50,000, with nearly 34 Hungary's nobility among the dead, including bishops and military commanders. King Bela survived. He managed to escape, but Hungary as a nation had been effectively destroyed. Hungarian historian Thomas Espalato wrote, "This is the day Hungary ceased to exist." Why did Hungary lose? Not because they were individually weaker. Hungarian knights fought bravely, but the country lacked internal unity. They had driven out the Cumans, losing 40,000 allies. They relied on outdated tactics, thinking war was all about knights charging head-on. The Mongols, however, played by different rules. Hungary also lacked vital intelligence. They didn't know how many enemies there were, or where they were positioned, and there was a lack of mobility. The Hungarian forces moved slowly, while the Mongols moved 3 to 4 times faster. After Mohi, the Mongol forces swept across the Hungarian plains. They didn't need to occupy every city. They simply burned, looted, and killed. Over 6 months, an estimated 25 to 50% of Hungary's population was wiped out, about 500,000 to 1 million people. Pest, the largest city, was burned to ground, and Estrege, the old capital, was destroyed. Bela fled from city to city, unable to reassemble an army. By autumn of 1241, Mongol forces reached Austria. They raided the outskirts of Vienna, and Frederick II, Duke of Austria, tried to defend the city, but could only protect the main urban area. In December 1241, Mongol scouts reached Bohemia in modern-day Czech Republic, and planned to advance into Germany, Italy, and France. Europe, for the first time in history, faced the possibility of complete annihilation. But then, one night in December 1241, in Cakrum, 8,000 kilometers from the battlefield, a drunk man collapsed and never woke up. On December 11th, 1241, Ögedei Khan, 56 years old, was on a winter hunting trip. According to Mongol tradition, hunting wasn't just for recreation but also military training, a way to maintain horsemanship and archery skills. But for Ögedei, it was also an opportunity to drink with his generals. That evening, after a long day of hunting, Ögedei hosted a feast where alcohol flowed freely. He drank with a man named Abdul Rahman, a Muslim who surrendered. Historical sources report the next events with slight variations, but the core remains the same. At dawn, a servant checking on Ögedei found him motionless. At first, they thought he was just passed out drunk, but when they approached, they realized he had died. The likely cause was a stroke or liver failure, both results of years of heavy drinking. But immediately, conspiracy theories spread. Some blamed Abdul Rahman, claiming he poisoned the Khan. Others blamed Talo's sister-in-law, as Talo had died under suspicious circumstances in 1232. However, the Mongol aristocrats who knew Ögedei best acknowledged the simple truth. He died because he couldn't stop drinking. News spread through the Yam system. The Mongol Empire had one of the world's fastest communication networks. Yam, a system of horse relay stations. Each station was 40 to 50 kilometers apart, always stocked with fresh horses and messengers ready to go. A messenger could travel 200 to 300 kilometers per day, 3 to 4 times faster than any European system. News of Ögedei's death quickly spread throughout the empire. But here's the key question. Did the news reach Ögedei Khan in Hungary fast enough to explain the Mongol withdrawal? Historian Giovanni de Pan del Carpin, who visited Mongolia years later, claimed the Mongols withdrew because of Ögedei's death. However, modern historian Stephen Powell calculated that even with the Yam system, a messenger from Cakrum to Hungary would need at least 3 to 4 months. Ögedei died on December 11, 1241, and the Mongols began withdrawing in late March 1242. This suggests that the news might have arrived just in time, but it may not have been the only reason for the withdrawal. Why did they really retreat? There are several theories. Theory 1, Mongol succession law. By tradition, when a Khan died, all princes and generals had to return to Cakrum for the Kurultai, the assembly to elect a new Khan. Not attending meant forfeiting one's rights to the throne. Ögedei Khan, though not Ögedei's son, was still Genghis Khan's grandson and had a say. If Bata didn't return, Ögedei's son, Gayuk, whom Bata despised, would be elected unopposed. Theory 2, terrain and logistics. The Hungarian steppe was perfect for Mongol cavalry, but to the west lay the dense forests of Germany, the Alps of Switzerland, and countless fortified castles. Mongols were adept at sieging large cities, but inefficient against the hundreds of small castles scattered across Western Europe. Each castle would take days or weeks to capture. There were thousands of such fortresses in Europe. Theory 3, lack of economic objectives. The Mongols didn't conquer for the sake of conquest alone. They needed plunder, taxes, and trade routes. Russia offered furs, silk, and important trade routes. China had silk, ceramics, and advanced technology. Persia had gold and luxury goods. But what did Western Europe have in 1241? Forest castles and poor peasants. No Silk Road, no wealthy cities like Baghdad or Qiang. Perhaps Subutai realized that conquering Western Europe would cost more than it would gain. Theory 4 suggests the Mongols planned to return. Some historians believe the Mongols didn't withdraw, but rather took a break. They intended to use Hungary as a base, rest through the winter, and resume their campaign the following spring. Evidence for this includes Ögedei Khan's actions. He didn't leave Hungary completely. He established the Golden Horde, a subkhanate with its capital at Sarai near the Volga River, which continued to control Eastern Europe. Indeed, in 1255, Battle was preparing for a new campaign into Western Europe, but he died before executing it. So, was Europe saved, or did it save itself? This is a question I posed at the start. If Ögedei had lived another 10 or 20 years, could the Mongols have conquered Europe? The argument for yes is strong. The Mongols defeated every European army they encountered. They had superior military systems, logistics, and command structures. Europe, at the time, was divided. France, England, and the Holy Roman Empire were engaged in their own conflicts. There was no cross-continental military cooperation. The argument for no is also valid. Western European terrain wasn't suited for Mongol cavalry. Thousands of small castles would be impossible to besiege, and supply lines from Mongolia were too long. Over 10,000 kilometers. Europe was much more densely populated than Russia, and resistance would be endless. If pushed to the wall, European nations might unite to fight back. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. The Mongols could have taken more territory, Austria, Germany, northern Italy, but they would have struggled to control all of Europe in the way they controlled China or Persia. Regardless, Ögedei's death closed that chapter of history. After Ögedei's death, his wife, Turgan, held the regency for 5 years. She was one of the most powerful women in history, but her reign was marked by instability and intrigue. In 1246, their son, Gayuk, was elected Khan, but he only ruled for 2 years before dying, also from excessive drinking. The Mongol Empire then descended into decades of power struggles, eventually splitting into 4 separate khanates. So, what is Ögedei's legacy? What did he build? Karakorum, the first capital of a steppe empire, a tax system that transformed conquest into sustainable governance. The Silk Road was reopened, re-establishing vital east-west trade routes. The empire he created stretched from Korea to Poland, the largest land empire in history. What did he destroy? The Jin dynasty, which ended 120 years of northern Chinese rule. The Mongol invasion forever changed Russian history, and Hungary lost a quarter to a third of its population, with millions of lives lost in the campaigns he ordered. What can we learn from Ögedei today? First, humility can be a strength. Ögedei didn't pretend to be a genius. He knew he wasn't his father's equal, so he surrounded himself with more talented people. In today's world, filled with know-it-alls, this is a valuable lesson. Knowing what you don't know is the beginning of wisdom. Second, addiction doesn't discriminate by status. Ögedei was the most powerful man in the world at the time, yet he couldn't control his drinking. This reminds us that personal demons don't care about fame or power. Third, history hangs by thin threads. One man dies from drunkenness, and Europe avoids invasion. Western civilization develops differently. Today's world is entirely different. This shows us that history isn't destiny. It's the result of countless small decisions and sometimes random accidents. Fourth, don't underestimate context. When we say Ögedei saved Europe, we're oversimplifying history. The truth is more complex. Geography, politics, economics, logistics all played their part. History isn't just about individual heroes. It's the interplay of countless factors. Fifth, the price of conquest. We often romanticize empires, but behind every empire are millions of dead. Ögedei expanded the largest empire in history, but at what cost? Is glory worth the blood and tears? One night in December 1241, a man died in a drunken stupor. He didn't know his death would change the course of history. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a villain. He was just a man with strengths and weaknesses, trying to fulfill his responsibilities while wrestling with personal demons. Ögedei Khan expanded the largest empire in history. He built cities, established tax systems, and reopened trade routes. But he also caused millions of deaths and destroyed civilizations. Ultimately, he died because he couldn't stop drinking. Did he save Europe, or did Europe save itself? The answer depends on how you view history. But one thing is certain. History isn't decided by gods or destiny, but by human choices and sometimes random accidents. If you found this video valuable, please like and subscribe to support me in making more in-depth history videos like this. Comment and let me know your thoughts on Ögedei. Did his death really save Europe? Share with friends who love history. Who should I cover next? Leave your suggestions. Some ideas. Ögedei, the greatest military genius of the Mongol Empire. Genghis Khan, the father and founder. Kublai Khan, who completely conquered China. Saladin, who faced the Crusaders. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.